Start.
Hello, colleagues and staff, and everyone who is at our training today. We are going to talk about our behavior resources as we go through different resources that I've looked up and found articles and journal entries too, so that you guys can go back after this training, look through all the resources I'm going to provide you with to hopefully find new ways to manage behavior in your classrooms. So we're going to start. So this is a picture that I thought I saw, and I was like, this is what everybody wants their classroom to look like in some way. Everyone's smiling, standing up, paying attention, looking forward at the teacher. Everything looks orderly, and I think that's what we're all striving to do, but many times we feel more like this, tied to everything the students are doing in the classroom. We're focusing more on what's going wrong instead of what's going right. A lot of the teachers feel like their hands tied, and the kids are just ruling over whatever rules you have put in place. You may feel manipulated, or that you just can't find a good way to control your students. So today I would really like for us to be back on this kind of classroom over feeling like a teacher who doesn't have resources and organizations. So I'd love to help you guys today to find more ways to control and manage the classroom. So what I researched and did a lot of different journal articles about was this principle of positive reinforcement. So what is positive reinforcement? It's adding a stimulus, praise, or reward for positive behaviors. So if your students are doing something correctly in the classroom, we're going to praise that behavior instead of the opposite, which would be negative reinforcement, which is what more of our natural inclination to do is just correct each student every time they're doing something wrong. So this is definitely the harder thing to do. This is the thing that we need to train our minds and our mouths to say when kids are doing something right. And so in my opinion, it's kind of setting a culture in a classroom to raise the bar for kids to meet you there instead of constantly correcting little behaviors in your classroom. So all of the resources that I'm going to provide you with are about positive reinforcement, and they have something to do with how we can use positive reinforcement skills in our school, in our classroom, outside, when they're at recess, all times of the day. There's different resources for that. So to begin, there was this article from the International Journal of Inclusive Education, and it was called Addressing the Wicked Behavior in Schools. So here's the APA annotation that you could go back, feel free to write this down and look up the article. That's what I'd love for you guys to do so you can research it yourself. But some notes that I took on this were the causes of bad behavior are the ways that we're going to start to see why students are behaving a certain way, and that's really important for us to know why, so that when we're trying to find ways to correct that behavior, we're going to the root of the issue instead of just correcting little things in the classroom and then just starting all over from point A every single time. So I'd love to see progress in what we're doing. So a lot of the causes of bad behavior, there was so many different things they listed, and of course we know many of them. It's like home life combined with what's happening in maybe their health, or maybe disabilities they have, exceptionalities, maybe they're academically gifted and bored, who knows. There's so many different reasons why bad behavior occurs, but for you to be able to identify that individually with a student is going to be really important in going through how we're going to enforce positive reinforcement in the classroom. So this is a really good one. I'd love for you guys to maybe make a list of some behaviors in your classroom that you'd like to tackle. Maybe a few challenging behaviors that you see every single day would be a good thing to write down, so that we can come up with certain positive reinforcers for those few behaviors, so it doesn't feel as overwhelming. So this is a great article to look at if you want to see more research that they did on the causes of bad behavior. So in the opposite of that, another Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions wrote this really great article, which was actually a case study about a good behavior game that somebody did in a classroom. And so what they did, this was more so a school-wide game that they put on. So this is actually something I'd love to talk about all together. So The good behavior game essentially was when all of the colleagues and staff in the entire school were under one system about how we reinforce good behavior. So whether that be like every time we see someone doing something well, we give them a ticket to be drawn eventually at the end of a semester and a certain amount of students win something, or if it's like being called like a leader or something like that, whenever we see a certain behavior, we all give the same praise. So I'd love for us to look at ways that we could do a school-wide program of positive reinforcement. So it's not just inside individual classrooms, but it's actually something that we can extend to our hallways and our playgrounds and our cafeterias and everything beyond just your classroom. So that's a big thing that we could talk about together. And I'd love for you guys to come up with some ideas about maybe some incentive programs that we could do school-wide, and maybe some terms that we could use for when kids are doing positive things in the classroom or outside the classroom. So this is a really great article also that I'd love for you guys to look at. This is the APA format annotation again, and that article will help you understand how this good behavior game was set up in this specific case study, so it might give you an idea for how we could set one up in our school. So again, we're talking about challenging behaviors. So this article is really great. It's about decreasing specific challenging behaviors. So when I was saying earlier to write that list of certain challenging behaviors, whether it's excessive talking or kids disrespecting you when you're teaching, or just getting out of their seat constantly, who knows. This one, it was actually about tardiness. So one thing that we do at our school and most schools is you get a slip when you're tardy and you have to bring it to your teacher, and it's almost like this red slip that is just this thing where they feel ashamed for being tardy, or it doesn't feel like that big of a consequence because it's just a slip of paper and they come turn it into their teacher. So that could be the flip side of it. And so this article was written by the Intervention in School Clinic, and they came up with a way to decrease tardiness through positive reinforcement instead of negative reinforcement. And what they did was, when people were on time to class, they actually rewarded that behavior by giving them praise notes. So the teachers were writing notes to their kids. Thank you for being on time. Thank you for being responsible. Thank you for taking initiative for coming to class and taking your education seriously. So that was a big thing that the school did, and they saw a lot of change throughout the times that they had these praise notes, because students started to want that affection and that praise, and so it actually ran into their behavior. So instead of focusing on the bad behavior of tardiness, they started focusing on the good behavior of being on time. So that is a thing that you might be wanting to do in your classroom if you have trouble with kids being late every single day, because that is disruptive to when you're trying to teach something, or you have to re-explain something after you've already done it with the whole class, or maybe they're a disruptive student. This is a really good idea if you struggle with that in your classroom. So a big thing also is, again, incentive programs. So we talked about a school-wide incentive program. This is actually an academic incentive program. So the Economics of Education Review Journal wrote a article about the motivation and incentives in education. It was evidence from a summer reading experiment. And so it actually was an incentive program for kids who read over the summer, which I know a lot of classes do something like that, where they have a reading program and students come back and get a certain amount of extra credit points or prizes or something from reading over the summer, and that gets put into their year. And I really liked that idea about how we could use incentive programs for our academics in our classrooms. So like, where could we positively reinforce performance on tests or turning in homework or whatever it may be, assignments, is a great thing to think about if we put incentive behind that and we're putting praise and things like that. A lot of times, especially we're talking elementary grades, kids actually value praise a lot, and they really want that reward from their study when school may seem boring or they have short attention spans. This is a really good place to look into what you could creatively do in your own classroom for an incentive program. And I know a lot of you guys have incentive programs for behavior, but it's a good thing to look into ones for academics. So this next one is by the Intervention in School and Clinic Journal, and it's positive behavioral supports, empirically supported use of behavior logs. So behavior logs were a really interesting way of combating bad behavior, again with positive reinforcement. So this study talks a lot about what role behavior logs played in their classroom, and usually when we think of behavior log, we think of certain students, maybe students that have IEPs or students that are struggling, and you have to constantly come up with certain behaviors that they're doing wrong and then bring it home to a parent to sign. This is a little different because these behavior logs actually highlight positive behaviors instead of negative behaviors. So this is especially great for students that really struggle with staying focused, or maybe they do have that IEP, and instead of us constantly saying what they're doing wrong, a really good thing would be to list the behaviors that they should try to reach throughout the day, and when they get them, you can sign that off, and then their parents can see, hopefully, that they're reaching to have positive behavior instead of always going home defeated with the negative behaviors that they were having that day. So this is a really good idea, again, for students that are struggling. Maybe you have students that have IEPs or special needs in your classroom, and this is a great way to also have parent involvement and it not always being a negative thing. So another thing was by the school psychology review. So if you like to look at more like psychological things, this is a really great article for you to go back and look at. It was the classroom checkup, a class-wide teacher consultation model for increasing praise and decreasing disruptive behavior. So this one, it was a lot about praise and how we're praising in our classrooms. And so my question for you guys is, are you having classroom checkups? So this is taking the pressure off an individual student and putting it on the group. And I like that idea sometimes of owning our behaviors together and not just focusing on one student that's always misbehaving. So this specific teacher, they came up with a model for it about how they praised the entire class, or they would make a consequence for the entire class. So this is kind of more like a group think, and then instead of you always having to call out a student that's maybe talking or getting out of their seat, a peer would hopefully be like, hey, just come sit down, and it wouldn't have to be as big of a reprimanding thing every time they moved or talked or something like that. And so they can more own their behavior together. And this is a great thing for positive reinforcement because, again, you're going to be more so than correcting the class. Our goal is to be praising the class when they're doing something correctly. So if the entire class is working on something well, or the entire class is having good conversation, communicating well, being kind to one another, we need to call that out. And maybe, again, you can do one of those incentive programs, and they can be class-wide. They don't just have to be individual. And then having classroom checkups is a really good idea every once in a while. So you can maybe once a month, once every few weeks, talk about what they're doing well and maybe some things that you would love to see improvement in. And that's a better way than just constantly nagging every little behavior in the classroom. So positive disciplines is another thing that the International Journal of Disability Development and Education wrote about. And this was relationships among teachers, positive disciplines, students' well-being, and teachers' effective teaching. And so this study was of a special education classroom, and actually in Taiwan, which is really interesting to sometimes see how other countries do education. And so they were looking at the positive disciplines that they were putting in place, and it was actually increasing teacher effectiveness. So it was cool to see the data of teachers that were doing positive reinforcement were actually having a more effective year, as in more effective test scores, more effective just time that they're using in their classroom. They were able to get more things done in a less amount of time. So it was all around more effective when they were able to do positive disciplines. And again, it was another country, so everything looks a little different in Taiwan, but it would be nice to, it's a really good article to read to have another perspective. And I'd love for us to figure out how we could be creative in our classrooms and what positive disciplines they use in other countries, that maybe we could start adding diversity to our own classrooms, or maybe some students would respond well to this kind of discipline that we never even tried before. So this is a great one if you're looking for some new ideas that you maybe wouldn't hear in a training here in America. I really recommend this article, and it was just written in 2019, so it's a really recent study that was just done and could be really helpful for your classrooms. And I would love to hear what you guys think about these positive disciplines and any ideas that we could even do school-wide beyond the classrooms. So those were my main resources. I hope you guys had time to write down all of the different APA formatted titles, and then you can just go and Google all of them, and the article will come right up. And I'd love for you guys, my point of this was to empower you, give you my input about each website that I went on and each journal, so that you guys can go back, look at them, and professionally develop what you want to in your classroom and in our school, and then we can come back and have another conversation about what you guys found in your research after you found out what I found out in mine. So the takeaways are, again, research what was provided in the PowerPoint. And these are my two big questions. What is one small change you can make to praise your students instead of correct them? So my hope is that tomorrow you can go back into your classroom. You can just one small change. I'm not asking you to change everything. It's already the middle of the year. I know it's hard to think of all the things you want to change, but let's focus on one thing and figure out where we can put positive reinforcement or praise instead of doing constant correction in our classroom. And let's just see what happens with that. And then what school-wide ideas can change the culture of behavior? So again, earlier we were talking about the incentive programs that we could do school-wide, but what are some ideas that you guys have to change, again, our school's culture about behavior? Like I want us to be a school of positive reinforcement and praise. And yes, there's going to be, this is not to say that there's not room for correction and there's not room for discipline, because I absolutely think there's times for that, but this was focused on positive reinforcement, so all of these resources are honed in on that. So this is just a specific training, so don't think that discipline is going out the window, but this is just another idea of how we can better manage our classrooms. And just I have tried to pick one way so that we could look at a bunch of different articles and really research this kind of behavior management in our classrooms. So thank you guys for coming today, and I appreciate you listening.